righty, buddy. Final talk of the day. Penn is here to walk us through how to bootstrap an indie startup. It's all you, Penn. I'll be around for the questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay. Hi, everybody. I'm Penn. This is how to bootstrap an indie startup. I will overview in this presentation. We're jumping right into it here very quickly. A bit about me, of course. Something that Maria said in the last presentation right before this one was the vanity section, and I thought that was very funny, so I'm going to call it the same thing. This is the vanity section where I will brag about myself and then introduce a little bit about, why I'm doing this presentation, things like that. Once we get through that, we'll go through the steps and the fundamentals in my mind of what goes into bootstrapping an indie startup. Specifically, this presentation is about the in-between of I want to have an indie studio, I want to have an indie team, and I need money to finish it. And so everything that happens between that. Now, you can see that we will get to a section for do you need funding? And ultimately, the answer is not always yes. You don't always need to get to funding. It could be from I want to do this to release. But overall, we will focus on the I want to do something to at what point do I need to get money and what do I need to do to get that? And so we will understand the goals for the project. We will understand the audience for the project and talk about things like, when there needs to be a good market fit, when you need to have data, development routes for how can you and how should you develop the project. Again, do you need funding? Is it a thing that is relevant? The overall structure of the team and being able to manage expectations and then understanding that team and the turnover rate that comes with bootstrapping things, of course. Turnover is one of the biggest pain points and struggle points for indie teams, especially when you don't have a bunch of veterans on the team that have been through the ringer on it, where this is their first time or second time or even third. Turnover rate is inevitable. And so we'll talk a little bit about things that lead to turnover and things that startup founders within games can look for and try to manage to avoid high turnover rate. And then towards the end, we'll talk about pitching and pitch decks and vertical slices and the things that go into a build to be able to present, the best possible case of your team and your project to an investor to get you the funding that takes you the rest of the way. And then, of course, as with every other one, we will take some time at the very end for some questions. So without further ado, we will break right into it. Who am I? I'm Penn. Pendragon, call me whatever you want. But I'm Penn, and this picture is cropped incorrectly on this page. But I am co-founder and head of studio at Digital Hazard Studio, not Digital Hazard Stud. We incorporated in early 2024. This is a picture of a couple members of the team at a team dinner at GDC this year. I believe it was this year, not last year. From left to right, that is Nick, our concept artist, Riley, our art director, and then to the right of me is Jason, our 3D environment artist, and to my left is Eric, my co-founder, and a dear friend who works in this same lovely little office that I do. I am an experienced indie developer. I have over 30 credits between publishing and development, and that is starting quite some time ago, about 9 years ago in QA. And then moving up slowly through the ranks and getting into design and production and really finding my passion in the two of those, more so in design, but my roles more so went into production just as a result of my career path. But eventually, I found myself here after a layoff in December of 23, January 24. I had already been working on a concept for some time for a game, and Eric, we had previously done a startup together, and that one didn't work out. Ultimately, we just found that we didn't necessarily have the expertise for it, and we came together and we decided we should do something. I just got laid off. I want to do something fulfilling and passionate and fun. And Eric asked me, he said, what should we do? And I said, well, I know how to run a studio, so let's do that. And, did I know as much as I thought I knew then? Maybe not, but I think I have a better idea now. But at the end of the day, we decided that we would do a studio, and we quickly onboarded some early team members and started prototyping right away. And since then, we've gone through several prototypes. We've gone through several iterations of the game visually and narratively and in systems design, and many, many iterations of the pitch deck. And currently where we stand is we are having positive conversations around the board with a number of investors as we look to secure our seed round. And so we are bootstrapped, and we have been bootstrapped for 21 months technically, but with this team and in the full production of bootstrapping, more like 14 months, 15 months. But we have been fully bootstrapped for some time, and through ups and downs and challenges and lessons learned, we have made it work. Part of the early stages of this project for us, and what's going to be true of any project for you, is understanding what is the game that you're making, right? From that, we need to understand the goals. We need to understand the long-term vision of the project or the studio or whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish. I imagine that the perspective of the listener for this is that of a founder, that of a leader, that of a person that wants to be the head of at least a department, if not the entire team, on an indie project, on an indie startup company. And so it's important to understand, first and foremost, are you building a team to develop this game, or are you building a team to develop a studio? Now, to develop a studio, you still have to make a game. And so the first part, that project vision, is always true. But what you should be thinking about, at least fundamentally, to be able to answer with yes or no, is in that studio vision, are you building a team to develop one game, two games? Do you have a plan for what comes next? If you succeed, of course, everybody can say, well, we'll make a game and we'll make money, and then we'll make another one. But what's your plan if you don't succeed? What are the margins for success there? What are the margins for failure? At what point do you stop, and at what point do you pivot? Because it could go all to plan, but it might not. And so it's important to understand your own goals internally to be able to reflect on that and think about how you're going to present this opportunity to even yourself when you're thinking about it, but especially to people that you want to hire to work on your team, and to investors that you want to fund your project. If you are going to people that you're hiring with the promise of working on this game and getting some rev share, and then that's that, and we'll see what happens, then that's the expectation that you're setting for them. But at the same time, if you're saying, hey, do you want to be a part of something bigger? The first thing that we do might not be so big, but the larger plan is, then that's what they're signing up for. And neither one is right or wrong. It's whatever is right for you and whatever your goals are. But ultimately, the types of individuals that you will work with are different depending on that outcome. And so it's the first thing invariably that you need to understand is whether or not you just have the project vision and your goal is to make the game and see what happens, or if you have the larger studio vision and you're ready for that long-term commitment. Beyond this is understanding your audience, right? So you know that you're making a game, whether it's for just the project or it's for the studio. You have to know why you're making it and who it's being made for and how much overlap there is in that. And so some of this comes down to segmentation and understanding market segments and what sells and how many people are in which areas and what are the trends and what are the future reporting. And you can go and buy a $10,000 market report from the business review company if you want to, but you need to understand who your players are to be able to use that sort of information in a beneficial way. And so some of the questions that we can ask is, are you making the game for yourself because you want it to exist? Maybe it's your dream game. Maybe you're trying to teach yourself game development and you're making this game as a way to teach yourself. Maybe you just want to, and that's it. And that means that the target audience, the players, are you and you only. Maybe other people will play the game, but if you're making the game for yourself with the intent of it only really being perfect for you, then you don't really have to think about the audience at all, because if you like it, then you like it, and that's fine. And we'll get into like the implications of that and what that means in a team setting versus a solo setting. But for now, if you're making the game for yourself because you want it to exist and your expectation is that only you will play it, that's fine. Now, if you're making the game for yourself because you want it to exist, but you want other people to play it because you want to make it because you simply believe that it will be good and it will make money, then you need to start understanding what are the segments of the market for that. What are the kinds of people that want to play it? What are they saying they want? And does that agree with you? And at that point, you're making a game to fill a gap in the market because you're looking at what the people want and you're thinking about that. So are you making a game to fill a gap in the market? If that's if the answer to that question is yes, then there's a lot of data collection. There's a lot of market research that goes into that. And you need to understand fundamentally who's going to play this, who's your primary audience, and then who's your secondary audience, right? If you say wanted to make a Call of Duty competitor, you might say that the target audience, the primary audience there is competitive gamers, but there are also casual gamers. So the secondary audience is going to be casual shooter players, where you need to build systems and art and narrative that tailors towards the competitive side, because that's your primary audience. That is to say, a limited narrative and easy, flat, like easy to see, high visibility, flat shaded artwork, so that your competitive players have the edge that they need. But you might also have content systems and visual monetization systems for the casual players, because in a game like Call of Duty, more money comes from the casual players than the competitive players. But the game is still built at its core around that primary audience. And so you have to think about, if there is a gap in the market, there is no Call of Duty there, then are you satisfying what the players need? And then as well, are you making the game to refine a flawed experience, a flawed execution of a concept? It could be great, but flawed. You could see a game, love it, really adore it, but just think that it has a couple of problems that if they were fixed, the game would be better, the game would be more fun, the game would be more engaging and more interesting for the players playing it. By all means, that is a valid reason to make a game. There is such a thing as not reinventing the wheel, but making it rounder. And if that's what you're doing, then you understand that the overlap there is essentially one-to-one with whoever your competitors are. And so does that market make sense? Is the market itself, are the players in that market saying that they want those flaws fixed, or is it just you? And so you understand the audience. And if the answers to the questions like, well, do other people agree that you are fixing something, that you are making something better, then by all means, you're filling a gap for somebody, for a set of players. If they generally don't agree, then you're filling the gap for yourself. And you could also be making the game for another reason entirely, right? It could be for the love of the game. You love making games. You don't even like the game you're making. It happens, right? You're just making it. Sure, whatever. In that case, you don't have to give so much thought to the audience, but you still need to understand, even if I'm making this game randomly, who's going to play it? What do they want? And then does existing data back your claim? That's, like we mentioned with filling a gap, does the market research make sense? The $10,000 TBRC report is not going to do you any good if you don't understand your players, but maybe it will if you do, and then there's data that backs up your claim. When it comes to developing the game, there are routes to developing it, right? In bootstrapping an indie startup, we say indie startup, it's okay, that could be 100 people, but it's probably not going to be. It's probably going to be 3 or 4, maybe 5, but it could be 1. And so there's a couple of approaches to developing, and there's a couple of approaches to the type of team and the size of team and the expertise and individual focus of the members of the team when it comes to making this project that we've established as you have an understanding of, right? So given the previous 2 slides, you understand what it is that players are looking for. You understand what kind of game you're making. You understand the scope of the game. Those are decided things. Now we have to think about how are we going to approach the development of it. And so we have true solo, 100% you, that's it, right? There's no simpler way to explain it. Solo plus support. This is the way that most solo games are developed, right? Everybody will say, oh, it was made by one guy, but really it was made by one guy or one girl and a couple of outsourcers or a third-party publishing that's helping with distribution, or even just a friend who's playtesting the game, right? That counts as support. It would be hard to be truly 100% solo, nor is it recommended. Small team is maybe less than 10. It could be less than 15. It does ultimately depend on scope. A small team could be a small team for the project, or it could just be a small team generally speaking. But for the purposes of this, we will talk about small team generally speaking, because with any project, you can have such a thing as too few or too many people. And then a bigger team, we will just describe as bigger than a small team. And the way that this works is you've got people that are very specialized. If you're going to have Batman's cape guy who's just working on the cape physics for 2 years, that's very much a bigger team thing. On a smaller team or a solo and support team, you're not going to have that because cape guy is going to have other jobs. And so we will break down each of these a little bit more about what they mean and what the implications are with them and why you might want to use them. But one of the things that I really want to be considered as we go into this and as we think about this is not a de facto, this is how you should be making your game. At the end of the day, you know best the needs of yourself, and you know the best the needs of your team and your project, and you know your goals. If your goal is to build a giant studio, you already know that you don't have to start with 50 people. But if your goal is to build a small, intimate studio that has 5 people in it, you understand full well that you probably shouldn't hire 10 people, even if the scope of the project calls for it, because you're not going to be able to maintain the opportunity for them in the future. So that's where you look for solo plus support, or even small team plus support. And any one of these can be mixed and matched or shifted in and out of place throughout development. You should just have a firm understanding of the overall sense of direction that you're taking as time goes on. And so you could go from solo to a big team or vice versa. But if that's going to happen, you should have a very clear plan of how that's going to come about. And so true solo, easily the most uncommon, right? There's a few reasons you might want to do everything yourself. Not many, but there are a few, right? Just like we talked about at the start, if you're making the game for yourself because you want it to exist, there is a chance that you can also just do it yourself. You have a clear, strict vision that you're not really open to adjusting. This doesn't mean that you're wrong about what your vision is. It's just that you are very firm on it. You understand that what you are making is what you want the end product to be, and you don't want other people coming in and giving their opinions and advice because you don't agree with that. Ultimately, working with others will bring change about the project. It will bring endless feedback to the project, and working alone, it won't. I think feedback's a great thing, but if you are working with a very inflexible concept, then doing it solo might be the move. And if you believe that you possess the time and the skills and the energy and the work-life balance to do it yourself, by all means do it. If you don't need help, why have some? Solo plus support. Now, this is what, a solo dev really is. And there's a handful of reasons you might want to do solo and support. The biggest reason really is that the scope of the project just isn't big enough to justify a team. We've already established that you know who your market is, but you also need to know about the scope of your project. You also need to know how much really goes into it. How much work is it going to take to bring this to market, to bring this to a 1.0 release? Maybe you're looking to crowdfund, and getting it in a demo state for the crowdfunding wouldn't actually take that much effort. And so the scope of the project sometimes just doesn't justify having that big team. In the same way that if you're trying to build a studio with 5 people and you hire 10, there's too many cooks in the kitchen as a company. The same is true for the game. If you have a demo in the works that could be done with 3 talented people, why have 10 talented people? And the development time could just be so short or long that it isn't feasible to hire permanent people for that. Where you are bootstrapped, you understand that you're not going to pay anybody, but it can also be done in a month. And there's no reason to spend a month hiring people if in that same window of time, the project will be done. But at the same time, if you know that you're in for a 5-year project, asking somebody to come in and commit 15, 20 hours a week for the next 5 years is not going to be an easy thing to do. And so sometimes it's the scope. And in addition to the scope could be so big that it's too big of a time investment. And so you might have to be solo. Again, with the clear, strict vision and not wanting change to come to the project, the same applies for that solo mindset. And then you just can't make the game alone is a good reason to get support. Most people can't. There might be a select few in the world that can, but at some point you're going to want people to play it and tell you if they like it, and we'll call that support. And so you can't make the game alone. You need support. And so solo plus support ends up being the answer for you. Now, getting into a bit more about what this presentation is really tailored towards. If we've established that you cannot be solo, and we've established that you understand your audience, and that you are making a game that fits whatever purpose you are trying to serve, and we have established that you need to raise money, now we look at building the actual team to build that product. And so in a small team approach, you have a mix of generalists and specialists. For example, in the early days of Digital Hazard, I was not just the producer on the project, but also the designer and also a programmer and also a VFX artist and also many other things. In the same way that our engineer also does our DevOps, because we don't necessarily need a dedicated embedded DevOps specialist, but somebody has to do it. And so we have our engineer handle that because he has the generalist skill set to be able to handle that. But you also have specialists that contribute to areas that specifically need that. We have a 3D artist that just does 3D environment art. It's all he does. That's because this game has a lot of 3D environment art. And so at the end of the day, somebody has to do that, and it's going to be a lot of time spent. We have an animator that just animates. We have our art director who's also a technical artist, and so he's more of a generalist. And so you'll have this mix of people that take multiple roles, because each one of the roles is kind of light. Like in the art director role, there is creative direction and establishing creative vision, but at the end of the day, there's 4 people to manage, and so there's not all that much time spent being a director of people, so to speak. And so that's where he's more of a generalist. Now, do you need a small team? Probably, if you possess a leadership or creative skill set, but it's not diverse enough to do things alone. Say you are a great CEO, but you don't know anything else about game development. You're a great team leader, but you've never even made a game before. Well, you have to have a team, because, how else are you going to make the game? With the example that a technical director could be a good creative director, but probably won't be within the confines of a project where they're already being the technical director. You could also have a strong vision, but the scope requires more permanent team members. You might be fully capable of doing it alone, but your project has a wide scope, and so you need more people to get it done if you're going to beat market saturation. Of course, that's part of this process as well. Is if you are making a game to fill a gap in the market, I can promise you 100% from the bottom of my heart that you're not the first person to think of it. And if you are, someone else is going to think of it very soon. And so ultimately, if you're filling a gap in the market, you are fighting the time, you're fighting the clock against market saturation. And so maybe you need to have a team so that you can execute on a shorter timeline in order to beat that saturation. But also, if you want to work with a team, because that's what games are about. I think that's something that makes games special. I think that is a huge reason for me personally. I'm biased. I like to say that I make games to bring people together, and that's not just the players, but the developers, creating a welcoming and engaging work culture that establishes, trust and passion and fulfillment amongst the team members. is important to me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I feel that I certainly could do some of my ideas alone, but I just don't want to. And so a team is the solution. Now, sometimes a small team's not enough. And so that's when we get into talking about bigger teams. And in this approach, specialists do what they do best, and they specialize. There's a few reasons you might want this. And the first one, and the one that will come to your minds immediately, is the scope of the game is huge. And a small team of 5 or 10 people simply can't do it, again, before market saturation. If you're trying to make a Call of Duty competitor, well, somebody else already is, and they come out all the time. So you need to be able to act quickly and be the next person who releases so that you can capitalize on this hole that you're seeing in the market. And it brings a load of questions that we won't get into because this isn't about building a AAA startup, right? But having a big team is certainly the kind of challenge that will make it very difficult to succeed in the early stages, because having a lot of people while bootstrapped and managing all of them and managing all of those different expectations is very hard. But if you need a big team, that's a challenge that you'll need to take. And so if that's a challenge that you don't want to take, or you don't feel prepared to take, or you just think that it's unrealistic, say you're building a $20 million project that way, maybe you need to reduce scope and you need to look at, downsizing the project and having a more, maybe not reasonable, but having a more, current market reasonable expectation for what it's going to cost to make it. And looking at the cost analysis of, well, people are getting funded in this range right now, and if I need to get funded this year, I should be in and around that range. And so this is the team that I should have for that. And so sometimes you'll need to adjust the scope for that. Now, of course, it goes without saying that if reducing the scope hurts the project, don't do that. But this is not a systems design talk as much as I wish it was. So, we'll leave that for another time. But some of the other reasons you might be able to do a bigger team is if you have executed in the past. If you've done a game already, you have an indie startup and you're looking to make another game, whether or not the first one succeeded, it could have been a massive bomb. You've executed. You've shown that you as a team, as a leader, and then your team as individuals and as departments can execute. You're now showing that you can do the next game. If you say, I'm going to make game 2 because we already made game 1, everybody's going to believe you. I think nobody's going to doubt that you can make the second game. And so that's a huge thing that you can lean on. And you can say, well, we made game 1 with 5 people and people complained that there just wasn't enough content. You can pretty easily go and make an ask that, well, we think we should have 15 people, but we need this much money for that. And I think as long as your game concept is solid, most investors would look at that and say, well, you've shown that you know how to do the work. You just need scale. And as long as there's a good market fit for the product, it's a relatively secure investment overall. As well, if you have a veteran team with a really strong game and a strong long-term studio pitch, you're pretty much golden, right? You are what investors want. The unicorn team, ultimately, in a unicorn game, is going to get you funded eventually, even if the market is rough. If you are a reasonable cost and you have a very talented people, then I don't think that you'd have any reason to doubt that you can get that funding. And at that point, don't reduce your scope, don't reduce your team size, because you're great, right? If you have 20 people that all have 20 years of experience, it just comes down to if the game is good. And if the game is good, congrats, right? You've made it. You're doing better than the rest of us. But part of that question, after you establish what kind of team you need, is, do you need funding? Do you actually need to go to an investor and show them that you have a safe investment, especially if you are a team of juniors that, you've not done a game as a group before, or, maybe even none of you have done a game at all, and that's fine. Games is an inclusive industry in terms of, an outsider can make a game and it can succeed. And so it's not like you can't make the game. It's just, it might be difficult to get funding, and you might know that. You might be very aware of the things that aren't attractive to an investor. It doesn't mean that the game's going to be bad. You just think funding will take so much time and energy that it's going to be challenging. And so we'll talk a little bit about what are the things that you should look for to determine if funding is something that you actually need to try and secure. In addition to this, of course, I can say from personal experience that, in projects that I have successfully funded, in most of them, it's been very much a conversation of, we want to do this with money and we made a prototype and let's take it to them. And then within a number of months, funding was secured. But at least anecdotally, it is still challenging and sometimes the time's not worth it. Here at Digital Hazard, we had an old version of the game that was quite different to the one we have now and quite a lot worse, might I add. That version of the game, I wouldn't describe it as good or fun. But regardless of that, we still shopped it around. We still talked to people. We still did the whole pitching, and we spent so much time and energy on pitching that we weren't actually fixing the game. Eventually, we came to terms with this. We realized this. We said, okay, we need to stop pitching and fix the game. We did that. Game's great now, and I love it. But there came a time where the game was suffering because we were spending more energy on business development than we were on making a good product. And the investors we were talking to, they could see that. And so we had to re-strategize and reprioritize. And so if you asked me then, do we need funding right now? I would have said yes. But if you ask me now, did we need funding at that time? I'll tell you, it would have been great, but no, and we weren't ready. So funding needs, when you're bootstrapping, you need to think about, do I need to pay this team? Do I need to pay myself? Are we sustainable? And you should determine whether or not you can bootstrap all the way to release. Is the scope small enough that the team can finish in a short time? In the same way that hiring people doesn't make sense if it's going to take you a month to make the game, if it's going to take your team 3 months or 6 months to make the game, you might not need to get funding at all, because I would argue pretty heavily that most people that you bring onto a bootstrapping team could do part-time work for 6 months and then get the game done and they're done with it, right? And so you might not need to secure funding, especially if you have something that you've been working on solo for a long time and you're bringing it to a team to bring it the rest of the way. And the funding amount might be negligible compared to two things, really. First, the extra effort it would take to secure it, again, with that idea of taking months to find funding instead of taking months to polish the build. But also, it might be negligible compared to the revenue loss. If you're going in and looking for 6 months of funding, but you're losing 70% of your pre-recoup revenue, probably at best, that's a challenging situation to put yourself in. It's because 6 months of paid work is a lot nicer than 6 months of unpaid work, but the game might suffer for it. And so it's one of those things where you need to consider that if it can be done without funding, it does not mean it should be done without funding, but that is a question that needs to be answered at that point. And there are, of course, situations where it can't be done without funding, but generally speaking, you should always have some kind of plan of what do we do without money, right? If we are seeking funding and we don't get it, what happens? Because when you're going to an investor and you're talking about the funding that you need, the last thing they want to hear, or really they'd love to hear it, but the last thing that they should hear is we are desperate and we need your money, otherwise this can't happen. They might not like that because it might show instability. It might make them feel that the team might not be able to execute without the funds, and that the team's unstable and their personal lives are too unstable, whatever, right? Arbitrary reasons. I don't feel that way, but many investors do. And they might love to hear that because it means that they can get more out of you. At the end of the day, if you go to an investor with a good pitch and you say, I'm desperate, I'll sign anything, we need to get paid, you will sign a bad deal. It's going to be hard to sign a good deal any day of the week. But if you're telling them you're willing to sign a bad one, you're going to get a bad one. And so it's important to be able to, even if you're not saying it outright, to be able to show that you can do this game without them. You know how to finish this. Some other reasons that you might not need to get an investor is if there's enough market interest to crowdfund. Plenty of times people make a demo for free. They go put that free demo out on Kickstarter, and then they get the funding that they need to finish the game, or they get the funding that they need to go do some event coverage and generate wish lists and then go get a third-party publisher, right? But you can think about the approach. Maybe you don't need to go bootstrap to release. Maybe you just bootstrap to demo. But additionally, is the team self-sustaining? If the team can sustain themselves, then you might not need funding at all because nobody's struggling without it. But structure, right? And this is going to be a pretty hard segue. And so from what we've established about funding and whether or not you need funding and the team size and all of these things, we understand at this point very intimately of whether or not we need to ask for money. And that's great. Big picture idea. Okay, we know the future of the studio. We know what's going to happen with this game. We know how to get there. That's fine. But we actually have to get there. So now we're going from the big picture 5,000 foot perspective all the way up to 50,000 feet, right? There is no game if there is no game. And there is no team if there is no team. And how do we make sure that the team can be there? How do we make sure that the game can happen? And the answer to that ultimately is structure. Even a loose, vague, flat structure is still a structure. And a hierarchical, militaristic structure is also a structure. And neither one is right or wrong. It just depends on which one is right for the circumstances. And so a friend of mine, and honestly a great mentor overall, and highly recommend his work, is Ben Karsich. And one of the things that he likes to say is aligned autonomous and non-aligned autonomous teams. And so we'll get into very shortly about autonomy in teamwork, but one of the big points is the alignment versus non-alignment in team structure. And so when you're bootstrapped, both of these are valid, but typically the way that you'll see it is that an aligned team happens in both non-funded and funded studios, and a non-aligned team is more often in funded studios than non-funded. So an aligned team is one that spends more of their time together discussing and aligning rather than pair working and working in the same environment on the same task, which results in a globally shared product vision. Everybody has the same picture of what the end product looks like. Those big picture goals, this is what release day is going to be. Everybody shares that mentality and everybody functionally works towards that. You have a lot of flexibility in working hours and task delivery. And the talk that was right before mine, one of the big points was, work-life balance between doing games and having other work and parenthood. And something like flexibility is an absolute must. And it is worth considering that there will be people on your team that need this kind of flexibility. And so alignment is usually what you'll lean towards, especially given self-managing team members. And if you have an experienced or a more veteran team, so a self-managing team is essentially exactly what you want. Because micromanaging somebody who was micromanaged for 10 years is not going to get you necessarily very far unless that's what they want. Now, they could want that, and that's where the non-aligned comes in. So non-aligned is a bit of a misnomer. A non-aligned team is not necessarily a team that doesn't share a product vision or doesn't share big picture goals, but it's a team that spends less time aligning by talking to each other and more time, together, just working together. And the alignment comes through clear milestone planning and task sharing and a clear reporting structure. So I know what tomorrow looks like because I know what's been assigned to me in a non-aligned structure, where in an aligned structure, it's I know what needs to be done at the end of this month, and I personally know what comes between that, and I'm going to do that on Tuesday because I feel like it. That's more of an aligned team. And those are very extreme examples. Of course, these combine in many ways, and there's a lot of flexibility in the approach, but those are the extreme sides of the spectrum, really. An aligned team is not a disorganized team. It's just a team that fundamentally understands what comes next for them and what comes next for the next guy, where in a non-aligned team, you understand your own goals, you understand how your own contribution makes a rapid goal come to fruition, and you have consistent hours, you have a consistent delivery schedule. You're working at the same time as other people, and there's a lot of visibility and ownership for leaders. And so non-alignment typically comes into play in larger teams because you have a manager who is responsible for being aligned on the entire team structure and being responsible for being aligned on other teams' milestones. But within their team, their people are only responsible for understanding their own work. And so these are just two ways to think about how you manage and set expectations and establish consistency and flexibility for a team. It doesn't mean that an aligned team is perfect or a non-aligned team is perfect. They both have plenty of problems. It's game development. Welcome. But what we extend from this, whether you are aligned or not aligned, is whether you have autonomy or you don't have autonomy. So in an autonomous team, you have to be aligned to be able to succeed. And so should your team be autonomous? Should it be, I'm delivering my goals in a month from now, and I know what comes between, and I'm going to have one meeting in a month from now to figure that out. I'm going to have a meeting maybe every week or twice a week, but nobody's going to bother me while I'm working, and the meetings are just talking about work. Is the team well aligned on the vision of the game? And if not, more time will be spent fixing mistakes than actually moving forwards in development, because the team is going to think that they have a clear picture of the vision, and they're going to make creative contributions to that vision. But that creative contribution will be misplaced because maybe the vision is changing, or the overall the vision's just not been well aligned. And so you'll have a lot of maintenance, right? Aligned autonomous teams are high maintenance. You have to spend a lot of time in meetings, updating people, keeping, aligning people's meeting time so that everybody can be in a group call. This is the sort of, debate between remote and hybrid and in-person work in games, because if a fully in-person team shows up to the office at the exact same time, they will align because they'll talk to each other and they'll see each other's work and they align on that. But that's non-autonomous because they are working in the office. And so if the team is self-sustaining in delivery, well, of course they could all be remote. And of course they can work whenever they want, as long as the work gets done on time and they're self-sustaining of that. But if you're struggling to maintain output, maybe you have a team, maybe you've built a team, and now you're getting to this part of it, and you're seeing that we have a build due in 2 weeks, and this guy is 3 weeks behind, and this girl's 4 weeks ahead, and this entire department is just clueless, then maybe an autonomous model is not right for you because the vision is too complex for an autonomous model, or the team's just green enough that they need to have non-autonomy. And so non-autonomy is that everybody works in office at the exact same time to stay aligned. So non-autonomous work creates alignment by being there, and thus you don't need to spend the time in an aligned culture on aligning. And so you can have that non-aligned approach because alignment will happen by itself by being non-autonomous. And so you can spend in that non-aligned thought process, you could spend more time working together. And so non-autonomous work can function very well. And so it is a question similar to autonomous teams of, should you do it? Well, there's a number of factors to consider, and that is the scope and vision constantly changing? Because if it is, then you have to be non-autonomous. At the end of the day, if things are changing when people are not present, they will not know. And that's why people, tend to complain about things like hybrid culture, because at the end of the day, in a hybrid culture, there will be people that do not know about changes because, well, that was their off day. And so you'll see these things really crop up about halfway and beyond into development, where early on when you're iterating, you'll see that they just can't work alone. The team is fully disabled from doing so, and you'll have a lot of turnover high on. But a lot of that will go under you as well. Say that you're the producer and you're the leader of the team, then there are things that you just won't see because of the autonomy of the team. And halfway on, you see that you're making scope changes because you need to adjust for the tech debt or the creative debt or the narrative debt, whatever it may be, that was created from having an autonomous team during an iterative phase. Does the team need active managerial support? Again, if you just have a really junior team and they need guidance, they need mentorship, that's fine, but you have to provide that to them. If you don't, they will not succeed autonomously. And so you should be non-autonomous. And then also, and this is probably the biggest reason, and also the reason why big AAA games are all made in studios, in person in studios, is because of inflexibility in task and milestones. At the end of the day, if you're working on a strict timeline because something needs to be done by a certain day, you just can't wonder where your people are. You just can't wonder if your people are working. As a leader, you need to know that that's happening to be able to have the confidence to make the delivery on time. And so that inflexibility in schedule is usually the biggest driving factor for non-autonomy. Now, this is the second to last section, but is almost arguably the most important section, is understanding team and turnover. And you need to be able to really know who your team is. You need to know your people, and you need to be able to build a studio, build a culture, build a project management methodology around these people, or at least around the kind of culture that you want, and then hire people who fit into that culture. Are you creating fulfilling work for the team is part of knowing your people, right? We are game developers. We are passionate people. And sure, we all know of people, and I'm sure we know people in the industry that are maybe just doing it because they think it pays good. Joke's on them, I guess. Why are they making games? But there are certainly people that do it for the money. There aren't a lot of places to make money in games, but there are some, and there will be people that do that. But I think we can say, as a general rule of thumb, we're passionate people, and we'll only work on things we want to work on or that we care about. And if it's bootstrapped and you're working for free, you're not going to work on something because you have to, because you're not getting paid. You don't have to. So you're really only going to contribute to projects that bring you that fulfillment and that emotional satisfaction of working on something meaningful to you. And so know what the people on your team see as meaningful and fulfilling work, and then create an environment that provides that to them. If that is working freely and iterating on your concepts in engine and spending a week every 2 months or 3 months just trying new features, and that makes them feel like they have a creative outlet, give that to them. Because if you do not take care of the team, they will not take care of your players. And so you need to make sure that you are accomplishing that. Is there a healthy work culture? Are people friendly to each other? Is there open communication, and good task ownership and a general level of respect amongst the team? If this is a team where you make big sweeping decisions and everybody else listens, then, well, at the end of the day, that might not be super healthy unless you're paying them. And this is how to bootstrap an indie startup, not how to run a fully funded indie studio. So we need to establish healthy work culture, amongst the people that are doing things, and level set, have real expectations. And also, does everyone know everyone? This one, it might come off as a little bit of a curveball, but this is something that I've had to deal with personally at Digital Hazard, especially early on in the life of the company. Is, does everybody know everybody? Like, there were times, with the previous team members where we would get asked questions like, what does this person do? And sure, they had both started within a month when that question got asked. And so it had only happened to be the case that everybody was busy and they hadn't crossed paths yet. But we weren't at that time breeding the right kind of culture to have them cross paths, to have them interact, to have them feel like they are contributing to the same goal. When you're disconnected, You can do fulfilling work, but a lot of the fulfillment of making games comes with working with other people. Like we talked about at the start, we do it with a team because that's what games are about. If you feel disconnected from the team, you don't get that feeling anymore. And so you're not really getting what it's all about. And so I know we're at 50 minutes here, but I was told that we have a little bit more time because I'm the last one of the day. So we'll go a little bit over, but I promise there'll be plenty of time for questions. We've got a couple more slides here. So balancing expectations is a part of the turnover and understanding your team conversation. When expectations shift, the weight falls on more of the team, less of the team. This just happens. It's a roller coaster, and it goes side to side, and it just changes. That's game dev. There will be periods where the art team is slammed and the programming team isn't, and then periods where it's vice versa. But was the team aware of the shift in advance, right? These kinds of shifts will happen, but when you are a specialist and you are focused on your role, you're not necessarily watching when these shifts are going to come. And so you need to, as leadership, you need to accommodate for these people and be able to prepare to accommodate for them when the shift happens so that they're not making personal sacrifices. If you worked for me and you were a 3D artist and I told you, hey, everything's going great, just keep doing what you're doing, and tomorrow I told you, by the way, you have to crunch for the next month straight, no breaks, 40 hours a week minimum, that's a huge shift. You might just up and leave because you had no idea it was coming. But if I told you 3 months ago or 2 months ago, or at least as soon as I could, and I really explained it to you, you could make a decision about if you can do that. And it's not a conversation of you have to make sacrifices to make it happen. We can't always know, but if you have an established record of letting people know in advance, they're not going to blame you if they don't know once or twice. Does the team share the belief that the shift is valuable? This is equally as important, right? If they think that the priority shift is a waste of time, they're not going to feel good about doing it. Simple as that. And can they even reasonably execute, right? Are you setting an expectation that fills your desire to meet a deadline or an investor's desire to meet a deadline? Or are you setting an expectation that actually matches the output of the team? Because there is a significant difference between this is the minimum the team can do and this is the maximum the team can do, and here's some other idea floating around about what I think can be done. And so it should be a reasonable execution based on the team, and part of that healthy culture and open sharing is being able to give the team the opportunity to help you set these expectations. Turnover is inevitable though, right? Everything I just said gets thrown out the window when somebody quits because they have their own reasons, they have their personal reasons, and who are we to say, oh, how dare you leave my unfunded game startup, right? But if the expectations are reasonable and they've been clear from day one, and you've established with them from interview to today, and from today to a year from now, or however long you're planning on making this, or however long your studio will exist, have those expectations been clear? And if they will change, has the time that they will change been made clear? Is there enough flexibility for personal lives? You could be paying these people $1 million salary a year each. They still have a life, and it still should be flexible for that. And if they are managing a life where they have kids and they have a day job and they're working maybe 2 hours a day on your project, are you being flexible enough for them? Is it even a good mutual fit for you to have that? And if it is, make sure you're being flexible, because if you're not, if you are inflexible, but you also have a high expectation, that's when you'll have that high turnover rate. And really as well, is everybody able to make a valuable contribution? This is kind of the third time that we're touching on this point. And it really cannot be restated enough that we want to do fulfilling work. We want to do work that is meaningful to us. If you are having milestones where it's purely sequential, team by team by team, well, if the programming team is the first milestone, and then it's 2D, and then it's 3D, and then it's VFX, there's 3 milestones in a row where the programming team doesn't make a reasonable contribution and they don't feel the fulfillment and satisfaction. Even if during their milestone they feel great, there's 3 months that they don't feel great, or 6 weeks that they don't feel great. And it can't always be true that everybody contributes to every build. But generally speaking, when you are bootstrapping a team and you are creating an environment where people are putting their own personal time to work for free, they should always get the sense that they are doing something meaningful and they're not idly twiddling their thumbs waiting for their turn to do something, because they didn't sign up to work for an indie startup so that they could wait to work for an indie startup, right? This is a fast moving environment and people are prepared for that. They just need to feel that they're always doing something, or at least mostly always doing something valuable. Now, some closing thoughts as we get towards the end of this is about pitching. Ultimately, and I do like to say that word a lot, but ultimately, everything that we talked about leads up to a point where you're securing funding. Whether you're going to demo or you're going to vertical slice or you're going to technical demo, technical prototype, when you pitch, you need to have a good deck. And so having this deck, and this is something where there are a number of talks on this, there are a number of things on the IGB channel that I've gone through and watched so that I can be confident when I say, please go watch them, they're great, as well as things on like GDC Vault. The pitch deck should clearly outline a few key points, right? And so this is a very general overview based on all of that other content, as well as my own experience in reviewing and greenlighting pitch decks, is team background. Show who you are, for one, but more importantly, show that you're capable of doing the job, right? Show that, if you're a programmer, what's your experience, but how good of a programmer are you needs to be shown. But most importantly, that you are the right programmer for it. And the same applies to your design, to your business, to your art, to your marketing, to whatever you may have, to show that you are not just capable of executing. It is not just about the ability to execute, but showing that you are the right person to execute. And a lot of that comes down to doing effective hiring early on in those iterative stages and making sure that you are selecting people that will be a good fit when it comes time to do this pitching. Of course, game outline. All of this comes down to you're making a game and you can't have a team or a game without a game. So show it off, right? Show off your game design, show what makes it special. But as an extension of that, in your business outline, you want to show data. You want to show why it is that this game can be a success, why it is that you believe this is the right game to be made, because it's not just that the team is the right team, but that the game is the right game. And as an extension of both of those, that this is the right business, this is the right studio, this is the right place in the studio's larger plan. Or if you're only making this game, this is why it's right to only make this game and not have a larger studio plan. Maybe you're building something that is, tightly into a niche, and there's just no room to be a studio that works in that niche. There's just room for one game every now and again. But at the same time, maybe you're doing something that has a broad mass appeal and you're trying to be the de facto standard for that kind of game. Then it should show this is why it's right to do this game now. And this is why people will say often, and I'm sure it's been said and it will continue to be said throughout these talks, is start small, work fast and start small. Because oftentimes when you're presenting your magnum opus as your first game, the sentiment that you're going to get back from investors is, it looks like it will be great, but we just don't know that you and your team and your company can execute. And so if you can do something small, then you can potentially even get that pitched or get that funded easier by saying, we're a first-time startup. We're doing this small game just to prove that we can do it as a startup. Here's our larger business plan. And so that game itself might not even be a huge success, but you can show that it's a part of this bigger business plan. And so now it is the right team, it is the right game, and the game is happening at the right time for the right people. Back it with data though, right? At the end of the day, even if you're pitching that example of a game that probably won't do that well, but it's a part of a larger plan, show why it won't do that well. You need to show that you have a deep, deep, deep understanding of who your players are. Just like we talked at the start about making sure that you've established your market and you understand what segment and what overlap you're attacking, You need to demonstrate that understanding. Show the data for these players, show player numbers, show sales numbers, show concurrence, show average hours across Steam reviews. Go, scrape a bunch of review sites and do sentiment analysis. Get anything and everything you can that validates your pitch. Because at the end of the day, and this is one of the biggest points, until you have a game in market, there is no validation, right? Once you give people something to play, that will validate what you're saying, because if it's good, they'll play it. Until then, you have to show in any way that you can, any validation that you can. And so data is typically one of the only ways to do that outside of a build. And we'll get into build polish on the next slide. But data is probably your only way to be able to show that. And so do your market research, but show your market research and show it in a way that specifically backs up the things that you're saying on your deck. And then something that we do a lot at Digital Hazard, we run closed NDA-backed play tests. Show real player feedback. Show the negative things that people are saying and the positive things and how those converge to create the build that you're presenting to the investor. Because nothing looks better than real market validation, and what better way to get real market validation than to give it to the market, have people play your game. When it comes to what game is the investor playing, what game are these people playing, you've got technical and polished builds, and there are a couple very key questions, and we'll run through them very quickly, and that's, is the game heavily systems driven? Like it could be no art at all. The game is gray box 1.0. You just need a technical build. You can give them a gray box that showcases the features, because it's a game about these features, not a game about, the pretty art style or the great narrative. Those may be in your game, but it's a systems driven game. Now, in an art driven game and a narrative driven game where, overall the gameplay systems either are simple or they're less complex, but most importantly, when they are systems that have been done before, you say, I'm going to make a game that's like Telltale Walking Dead. Okay, I know what Telltale Walking Dead plays like. I want to see your art. I want to see your story. Because I know that fundamentally making that system is possible because it's been done so many times. So what it comes down to is the art and narrative driven aspects. And so, that being the inverse of the systems driven experience, it should be a well-polished vertical slice. It could be a 3-minute build, but it should be 3 minutes of your most impressive art, your most impressive narrative, and it should really be the hook, right? And so you're showcasing that hook in that build. What will impress an investor is not if the game is pretty, or not even if the game is fun, not even if the game has all of the systems and it's feature rich. What will impress the investor is if your build is representative of the final product, period, end of story. If that is good, if that is fun, if that is pretty, if that is feature rich, now they're going to pay you. But what matters to them is that it is a representation of the final product, because they simply can't make a determination about if they want to give you money, because this is not representative of what actually matters to the player. But as well, you should always consider, what can the team actually do, right? If your team can't deliver a feature-rich build in a systems-driven game, figure out the best you can do and polish that and then give that, right? Find some combination of the two. Most games are a combination of systems and narrative or art-driven, right? And so, and our game's no exception. So it's not like you can just say, oh, okay, well, there's more systems than art, so we're doing a technical build. There's always going to be some combination, but figure out what is actually representative of that primary market. This is the feature. If I'm making a burger flipping game, then the burger flipping feature is the most important thing to my primary market. So my build needs to, above all else, showcase the burger flipping feature above anything else. If I'm making an interactive painting game and my primary market is non-gamers but painters, I need to show how I'm competing with Photoshop, and that needs to show in my build. To close this out, though, some final tips and some takeaways from the presentation, and I know I'm a little bit over, but iterate on your business plan early and relentlessly, because big sweeping changes that come after you've hired your team will cause turnover. And so ensure that you're building the right kind of team for the right kind of job, and you're building the right kind of studio. Maintain clear expectations when you're bootstrapped. Once you're funded, like, you can be pretty strict. You don't have a negative culture, but you're paying these people, and so they have to do their jobs in the way that the producer needs it to be done to meet the expectation of the investor. But before then, none of that can happen. None of that can really exist unless you have a super disciplined team. So everybody should be able to understand any side of the business at any time. There should be complete transparency. They should know who the other team members are, and they should know why they're doing what they're doing, what needs to be done, and why that's important, why that's fulfilling and valuable. Polish your builds and your decks, right? Aim for a seamless and professional delivery. You want to showcase the core of your experience to an investor in a way that is engaging, and get real player feedback, right? That is an honest tip. Sure, I'm biased because we do it, but we do it because it's valuable. Enlist your colleagues and your friends and the general public wherever you can. Just get people to play the game. Go onto the like Break My Game subreddit or whatever it's called, and get them to play it. Sure, the feedback will be overwhelmingly negative because that's the point of the subreddit, but you're going to get feedback. And if you can analyze that feedback and say, well, everybody was really mean, but they were all really mean about this one thing, then you should fix that before you go and pitch. But the big takeaways, to keep it into 5, a quick bulleted list really is: seek feedback, collect data on the market, on your game, on your people, even small and fast updates to keep people focused on the big picture by doing small and committed goals. Keep those goals very clear. You want to maintain those expectations, and then iterate and adapt overall to the changes that will come. You are bootstrapped. Things will happen. People will get sick. People will quit. You will have things happen in your life. Some investor is going to say, hey, your game is horrible, and nobody else will have ever thought of it before. So be ready to iterate and adapt relentlessly when those things come. But with that, I will finally resign myself from talking nonstop for an hour. So thank you for listening.
Excellent work, by the way. It's one of those I kept nodding my head over here because I'm like, yep, been there, done that. Yep, seen that. All right, we've got a handful of questions here. So what would be the main 3 focus points for a creative director?
It's a good question, actually. It's a very good question, but I think the question could be refocused. I understand what are the 3 big things, and I did the whole 3 things throughout the presentation, but I think it could really be refocused into what role does the creative director have in the context of your team. So generally speaking, I'd say for a creative director, that would be visual, narrative, and content delivery. So you'd want a design director to handle the aspects of design, systems design, level design, and character and 3Cs and those things. But the overall art direction, establishing a good, clear, consistent art Bible for the project. The narrative direction, they don't have to be the writer, but they should be creating the box that the writers work within. And then the content delivery. How is that narrative being delivered? How is the art being delivered? How are you going to give that to players in an engaging, if it's supposed to be repeatable way, or if it's supposed to be a one and done, like a narrative RPG, in a one and done way? What is the order of events in content delivery of this art to this art and this story to this story to make it engaging for players? I would say that a creative director's overall focus is to ensure that the creative vision of the game is engaging for the people playing it.
All right. Next one. I'm curious to know, how do you begin to approach market and audience research?
This is the big one, right? This is the one that stumps everybody, and it's ever so frustrating. And Jay, I know that you've probably been asked this one hundreds of times, right? It's the kind of question that is, it really does depend on your project. But what I do personally, from a like zero perspective. This is not, I know what game I'm going to make. This is, I just got an idea for a game and I want to know if I should even think about making it. First thing I do is I go to Steam and I go and I sort by tags and I go through all of the tags that I think could apply to my game. I look at top 10 or 15 games in that category. I get a sentiment of the reviews. I look at the review scores. I look at projected sales numbers and things like that and say, okay, here's owner estimates. Here's, the language-based reviews now. That's a great feature. I like that Steam did that. And I'll look at those things, and then what I'll do is I'll take those games from those 3 to 5 tags that align with my vision, and I will look at what other tags those games have. Now, sometimes they're way out of left field, and it doesn't make any sense. I might be making a game that isometric is a tag that would fit my game, and I go to the top isometric game, and the other tag is horse simulator, and I think, okay, well, that doesn't fit mine, right? But there's going to be another tag in there that does make sense. Maybe the other tag is action, right? And so then I'd look at the top 15 on action. And of those, there might be one of those or several of those that all have the 2D tag. And I say, okay, so a lot of these popular isometric action games are 2D. And so I can make an informed decision that in this market segment of isometric action games, people prefer them to be 2D over 3D. Now, I don't know if that's true, and I'm making this up right now, but that could very well be the case. And so that's how I would start to make informed decisions about, are there highly reviewed, well-rated games in the tags that I am thinking about? And what is the kind of experience that they like? Does that align with what I want to make? If I wanted to make an isometric 2D action game, then by all means, that would be a validating thing for me. And that would be something that I can start to pitch with as well. Obviously, much later when I have a build, but I can say, look, we're building this isometric 2D action game. Here's all of the research that I did that shows that. And of course, manually combing through Steam is not efficient or all that effective, but that's where I would start.
So I love this next one. It might sound rude, but do you believe that a lot of answers are more of just a common sense approach?
I think that's honestly a big, that's kind of the point, really. I think doing this sort of like common sense level setting is more of a validation to indie founders than it is like a, here's what you don't know. I could talk for hours and hours and hours about any one of these slides as their own presentation. But this is the general idea for somebody who wants to build an indie startup. For the most part, you're confused. You've not done it before and you are just confused. And so, yes, I would say that most of these are a common sense approach, but, and not to sound like contrived, it's just, there's so much information at the start of, an indie startup and at the start of doing a project. And if you know that you're not going to be able to pay your people for a while, you just have to step back and think, what is the order in which I need to think about things? What do I need to do? And I'm sure you have seen it as well, plenty of times that teams will start and they'll do it all at once and they'll fail very quickly. And so it's something where, yes, I will admit that these are very generic sorts of answers to these kinds of questions, but it's very much the intent to validate that, yes, this is what you should be doing. And if you weren't aware of this, you should be.
And, it goes to say as well that a lot of the stuff a lot of times teams overthink a solution.
Exactly.
Where common sense is the same area. So, I mean, the common sense is the natural way to do it.
Yeah.
But they just overthink and get panicked. And yeah.
If I could summarize the entire thing, the whole presentation into 2 words, it would be Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is probably the right one.
So looking at the BD, the business development side, what was your first strategy to market?
So our strategy actually that we are adopting is to build a public demo. So, and I'll try to keep this point a little bit shorter. Building a demo takes a lot of extra work to just going start to finish 0 to 1.0 launch. At some point in there, you have to divert to finish doing a polished demo. Eventually, the whole game will be made, and you could cut a piece out of that to do the demo. And there's a lot of games that even do that, where the free demo releases on the same day as the game. But at some point in development, you'll want to start marketing with a demo if you're going to do one, and that's going to take stopping the progress to release and shooting off and doing the demo. And so for us, our strategy is to take the extra time, take the extra energy, and spend admittedly the extra money to go to demo, to go to market, so that we can use that to generate wish lists and prove to players that they should be interested in our game. And so our approach is a demo, and more often than not, that's why you'll see a lot of Kickstarter campaigns with very early stage demos, because they made something to represent, the heart of the game, and they put it out in the public, and they said, if you guys like this, give us money, essentially.
Good segue. When it means that numbers are not enough interest for a crowdfund, how many followers on Kickstarter would be a minimum to earn 10K?
Well, it's a very specific question without any kind of a specific answer, because followers, it depends, right? I wish followers could equate to an immediate, like a guaranteed funding amount. But I will say that 10K, generally speaking, and, look away when I say this, right, is not a lot. And if you're looking to raise it even on Kickstarter, it's not that much. There are not that many successful Kickstarters. And so if you're comparing 10K to successful Kickstarters, it's a lot. But if you are creating a successful Kickstarter campaign, it's not that much to raise. And so that's a very reasonable goal. If that is really the number that you're looking for, you are building in a positive direction, I would say. But you need to be able to justify to the people reading through your Kickstarter or through whatever your crowdfunding source is that you are actually building something worth that funding amount, especially given what your tiers are. If you're looking at a $5 tier and a $10 tier, why is the $5 tier worth it to them? And is it actually a viable solution? I've seen Kickstarters that both have succeeded and not, that they're my monitor turned off. That have both succeeded and not, and they've both offered the put your own character in the game kind of approach. And in many of them, it's not actually that feasible, because if you have 1,000 people pay for that tier to get you your funding, well, you're not doing 1,000 custom characters. You just aren't. And so you have to create a value proposition for the person that is crowdfunding you that is both valuable to them as an individual, and they see it as feasible. They think, the goal here is, if I'm looking at a Kickstarter project, I want to believe that this game is worth $10,000 in Kickstarter funding, that what I'm getting for my $10 contribution is worth $10, and that what I'm giving for $10 will actually be able to happen. And you'll find that if you can create an appealing and attractive pitch to the public, and then you have a fun demo, people will give you loads of money. Now, enough interest really comes down to how much time have you spent getting the game in the public. If you announce yourself the day you announce a Kickstarter, good luck to you, honestly, right? Spend time doing outreach, spend time reaching out to small, very intimate community streamers and saying, hey, I'll put your name in the game as an Easter egg and promise you a copy of it if you would like to play my demo on your stream for 10 minutes. And, just reach out to people and try to get yourself some amount of visibility, because if you can get a couple thousand people who know who you are, and then you show the public that your game is great, I'm sure that you will find success.
And we have 2 talks tomorrow on crowdfunding. So
very good. Yes.
2 opportunities to learn more. From Dan, what is your preferred method of extracurricular team building so nobody is confused about who's who on the team? Game nights, food outings, paintball?
So really, we take any opportunity we can. I play games with the members of the team any opportunity I get to. We also try to do a lot of co-working calls. They're very awkwardly timed. It'll be the middle of the day or the middle of the night, but we try to sit together and just talk about whatever we want, talk about life and have fun and make jokes and, light teasing around the board, just so that everybody has this sort of like fun behavior when we are in meetings. Because even though we are aligned autonomous and therefore we spend a lot of time talking about our work, we spend that time talking about our work in a fun sort of way. And that is immensely important to us in terms of being able to maintain a positive culture. But the who's who is part of that, is that extra time spent on alignment. So one of the things that I mentioned was you have to take the extra time to make sure you can get everybody in a call at the same time. And that's a hard thing to do. But when you do that and everybody gets to talk and have a roundtable discussion, a proper roundtable discussion where everybody speaks, then people will, if nothing else, get to hear the opinions of the team members of which they are distant from. And if they agree with those opinions, that brings the whole team a little bit closer together. And when you keep everybody aligned, you will generally have agreeable opinions.
All right, last one, then we'll let you go, Ben. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
What are your main focus points when you started the studio? Team, create more games, process things internally?
Yeah, so for me, it was about the game. It was very much about making sure that I was building a game concept that, one, had room in the market, like we've spoken about, but it was about creating an experience on paper that would be meaningful to the group of players that I wanted to appeal to innovate in a space that I thought was lacking in innovation. And I knew that I would need to accommodate for a team, and I would need to do budgetary planning and have endless spreadsheets and create a new pitch deck every 2 weeks. But for me, it was always about the game. And so when we hired that initial team, it was very much to iterate on the game. And so before we even kicked it off, it was all game and very little business. Right after kicking it off, it was all game, very little business. The moment in which we found out that we had something fun on our hands is the moment that we switched that priority to business. And that was that lesson that I shared where we actually switched too much to business, and then we had to kind of level set to make it more 50-50. But we waited to put extra time and energy and effort into working on the business side until we had a good game to work with, because at the end of the day, there is no game if there is no game, and there is no funding if your game isn't good. So the first and primary focus should almost always be making a fun game. And it is worth saying that even a third-party publisher with a deal that you don't like will help you with the business side and will help you with your banking and your finances and your legal and your marketing, because your game is good and they want your game to succeed. They get paid if your game is successful. And so at the end of the day, even in a worst case scenario, there are people on the investment side which will help you with your business acumen and will help you with your team process, as long as you have a great game underneath all of that.
Man, thank you so much. This is fantastic. A lot of good stuff. Tomorrow we've got another whole show full, a whole day full of talk. So make sure you check that out. If you do want the decks, remember you need to go to Eventbrite and get a free pass to the show. It doesn't cost anything, but it lets us know where to send the decks. But with that, yeah, we're out for the day. See you all tomorrow.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Bye.